My fiancée publicly humiliated me in front of all our friends last night. She called me poor and annoying for everyone to hear, then walked over and kissed another man right in front of me. She said I wasn't worth her time, that I had nothing to offer her. She thought she was trading up by leaving me for this guy just because he owns a fancy restaurant downtown. What she didn't know is that I'm far from the poor nobody she thinks I am. In fact, I'm more successful than she could ever imagine. I just never told her. And now, I'm about to watch karma play out in a way neither of us ever saw coming. I guess I should start at the beginning, because this story is a wild ride from start to finish. Vanessa and I had been together for a little over 2 years. We got engaged about 6 months ago, and at the time, I truly thought she was my forever. When we first met, it felt like fate. We bumped into each other at a mutual friend's networking event, of all places. I was there for business. She was there tagging along with a colleague. I remember spilling my drink on her shoes by accident, and frantically apologizing while she laughed it off. She teased me that I owed her a new pair of shoes. I offered to buy her a drink instead, and we ended up talking for hours that night. She was funny, charming, and drop-dead gorgeous. Long, wavy brown hair, bright hazel eyes that lit up when she smiled. I was hooked from the first conversation. We exchanged numbers, and by our third date, I was pretty sure I was falling in love. Vanessa had this way of making me feel like the only person in the room when we talked. She'd listen intently, laugh at my dumb jokes, and squeeze my hand at all the right moments. In those early days, I couldn't believe my luck. I should mention, I don't exactly advertise my wealth. I have money, a lot of it, but I learned the hard way not to lead with that. In college, I had an ex who only cared about the size of my bank account, and it messed with my head. So with Vanessa, I kept things modest. I drove an old Toyota Camry, lived in a simple one-bedroom apartment, and told her I worked in property management. All technically true, but I left out the part about owning the property management firm, and a lot of other properties too. My family's real estate business is massive. We own a big chunk of the city's commercial buildings and rentals. By the time I took over operations, I was basically in charge of half the developments in our city. But I wanted to be absolutely sure that anyone I dated loved me for me, not for my wealth or connections. So I lived a kind of double life. Humble, regular guy to everyone except a few close friends and business associates. When I met Vanessa, it was refreshing. She didn't seem fixated on money or status at first. Our dates were simple and fun. Taco, trucks and movie marathons, beach picnics with grocery store wine. She never complained that I didn't take her to five-star restaurants or fly her to Paris, which, sadly, some women in my social circle almost expected. Vanessa acted perfectly content with the little things. I remember one night, early on, I apologized for the cheap pizza date, and she just laughed and said it was the company that mattered, not the price of the dinner. That comment alone made my heart soar. I even called my best friend Jake afterward and gushed, "Man, I think this one might be different." For a while, it was great. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. She was finishing her marketing degree and working part-time at a boutique, and I kept up my regular guy act. I'd go to my small front office space during the day, a leased office I maintained as a front, where I posed as an employee, while actually handling my business empire behind the scenes. In the evenings, I'd pick her up in my Camry and we'd hang out at my apartment or meet up with friends. She met a few of my buddies like Jake, who knew the truth about me but never let on, and everything felt normal and right. But as the months went by, little changes crept in. Tiny red flags I brushed aside because I was blinded by love and, let's be real, relief. Relief that I'd found someone who seemingly didn't care about material things, except she started to care. It came out in little comments at first, like noticing other people's engagement rings or cars. I remember once we were at a dinner with her friend Marissa, who had just gotten engaged. Marissa's fiancé was some tech startup guy and gave her a huge diamond ring. The thing was honestly gaudy, but all night I saw Vanessa glancing at it. On our drive home, she said with a chuckle, "Did you see that rock? Lucky girl. When our time comes, you don't have to get me something that crazy, but I wouldn't complain if you did." She said it jokingly with a wink, and I laughed it off. But part of me wondered if she was half serious. Another time, we were out with a group and one guy showed up in a brand new BMW, the boyfriend of one of her college friends. Afterwards, she was scrolling through Instagram and showed me a photo of them with a car, saying, "Must be nice to have that kind of money, huh?" I felt a little sting hearing that, almost like I was failing her by not providing those luxuries, which is ironic, given I could have, easily, if I chose to. Outwardly, I just shrugged and said, "Maybe someday." She didn't push it further, but I sensed her disappointment, even though she tried to hide it. These were minor things, and she never outright criticized me about money back then. For the most part, she was affectionate and supportive in other ways. When I'd have a rough day, say a big deal at work fell through, she'd cuddle up next to me on the couch and let me vent in vague terms. I couldn't exactly tell her details without revealing the scope of my job, But I'd say something like, a client backed out last minute, and she'd sympathize and rub my back. Moments like that reassured me that she cared about me, not just what I could do for her. 6 months ago, I decided I wanted to spend my life with her. Despite the little doubts, I was convinced my love was enough and that she loved me back. I planned a proposal that was sweet, but not over the top. Remembering the joke about her shoes when we first met, I even incorporated that. I bought her a pair of beautiful high heels, nothing too extravagant but elegant, and attached the ring to the laces as I kneeled. It happened on the 2-year anniversary of the day we met. I took her to the same bar where I'd spilled my drink on her, then led her out to a spot overlooking the city lights and popped the question. The ring I gave her was my grandmother's. Vintage, simple, a modest diamond. It wasn't flashy, but it had sentimental value and I hoped she'd appreciate that. Vanessa said yes. She cried happy tears and threw her arms around me. In that moment, I felt on top of the world. She didn't complain about the ring at all that night. In fact, she seemed delighted, calling the proposal romantic and saying how much she loved the ring. I thought her joy was genuine. I remember holding her close, thinking I'd finally found someone who truly loved me without knowing a thing about my wealth. I even considered finally coming clean to her about everything, telling her that we wouldn't exactly be struggling financially after marriage. But a voice in my head told me to wait, just a bit longer. I was still insecure from past experiences, I guess. I figured we had our whole lives ahead. What was the rush in telling her? As we started talking about wedding ideas, little cracks in the facade grew. One night over takeout, we got on the topic of what kind of wedding we each wanted. I casually mentioned I imagined a small ceremony on a beach, or maybe a cozy gathering at a lodge. Vanessa immediately had a different vision. She described a big, grand wedding at a fancy hotel ballroom, over 100 guests, a live band, the works. I was a bit taken aback because she'd never mentioned wanting something so lavish. I must have looked surprised because she nudged me and said, "Hey, a girl can dream, right? It doesn't hurt to have big ideas." I remember joking, "Sure, but big ideas usually come with big price tags." And she responded, half serious, "Well, we better start saving or find a sponsor, huh?" The word sponsor hit me weird. It was a joke, I think, but it implied we didn't have money for her dream wedding. And of course, officially in her eyes, we didn't. These conversations made me uncomfortable. On one hand, I could have made her dream wedding happen without breaking a sweat financially. On the other, doing so would expose my secret or require a big lie about where the money came from. I wasn't ready for that, especially as her gold-tinged comments grew more frequent. In quiet moments, I started feeling uneasy. Who was this person I was going to marry? Did I really know her values? But I always squashed those thoughts and felt guilty for doubting her. Wanting nice things doesn't automatically make someone a bad person, I told myself. And maybe I was at fault for hiding my financial situation. If I'd been open from the start, none of this would be an issue. She might not have developed these resentments, expectations. I wasn't sure what to call them, but I sensed something was off. The week before the party, things felt tense. Vanessa had been hanging out with her girlfriends a lot, which was fine. I didn't want to be a controlling fiancé, but I noticed she rarely invited me along anymore. She'd say just the girls or that they were doing wedding stuff I wouldn't be interested in. One of those nights I was bored and scrolling on Instagram. I rarely post, but I lurk on a private account, and I saw a photo from that evening. It was a group shot of them at a lounge. In the background of one pic, I spotted a familiar face, Daniel, the restaurant owner. It looked like he was chatting with a couple of people from their group. My stomach did a little flip. Could be a coincidence. Maybe he just happened to be at the same place, or maybe the whole group, including him, went out since he'd become friendly with some of them after that birthday party. I didn't ask her about it, but it lingered in the back of my mind. Looking back, there were so many warning signs I ignored. I wanted so badly to trust her completely, to prove to myself that I wasn't just some cynical rich guy who could never find real love. Whenever that small voice of doubt piped up, when she'd gush a bit too much about someone's luxury car or get annoyed that I couldn't take a weekend trip because I said money was tight, even though it wasn't, I'd silence it. I kept telling myself, she's with you, isn't she? She said yes to marrying you, knowing exactly what your life looks like. That counts for something. If only I'd known where all those small cracks were leading. If only I had listened to the unease creeping into my gut. Maybe I would have been more prepared for what happened, or maybe I could have even prevented it, but I didn't. I walked right into the biggest humiliation of my life, blind and in love, with no clue of the storm about to hit me. The night of the party arrived, oblivious me walking straight into disaster. It was a friend's birthday party at another buddy's house, a low-key backyard gathering with string lights, music, and a cooler full of beers. I remember I was actually excited on the drive over. I thought it'd be a fun night with our friends, a chance for Vanessa and me to relax together. Maybe it would even ease some of the weird tension that had been building between us. Little did I know. From the moment we got there, I sensed something was off. Vanessa spotted a few of her girlfriends and made a beeline for them, barely giving me a glance. I ended up chatting with my friend Mike about a football game while keeping an eye on her across the yard. She was all smiles, but not with me. I saw her laughing loudly at something, and then I realized who she was standing with. Right beside her was Daniel, the restaurant owner, looking dapper as ever in a crisp button-down, drink in hand, entertaining. The small circle around them. My stomach tightened. I tried to ignore the twist of jealousy. This was our friend's birthday, after all. Of course, Daniel might be invited if he'd become part of the friend group. I wasn't going to be that clingy, sulking fiancé. I took a breath and tried to focus on my conversation with Mike. Maybe a half hour passed, maybe more. Vanessa still hadn't really spent any time with me. Every time I glanced over, she was talking to someone else, often Daniel. At one point, I saw her throw her head back in laughter at something he said, even touching his arm lightly as she giggled. The way she touched him, it sent a lightning bolt of recognition through me. It looked flirtatious. My heart started pounding. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she was just being friendly, but my gut told me otherwise. I gulped down the rest of my beer and mustered the courage to walk over and join their circle, hoping I was imagining things. "Hey, babe," I said, slipping an arm around her casually when I reached them. I nodded at the group, trying to sound upbeat. "How's everyone doing?" Vanessa stiffened under my arm. She gave me a tight, perfunctory smile. "Oh, hey," she said like I was an afterthought. "We're just talking about the new lounge downtown that Daniel's opening. He was inviting us all to the soft opening next week." "Yeah, you guys should come," Daniel added to me politely, but his eyes flicked to the arm I had around Vanessa's waist. Something in his body language made me feel like I was intruding. Maybe I was projecting, but I suddenly felt like an outsider in my own relationship. "Sure, sounds fun," I mumbled. I tried to catch Vanessa's eye to share. A moment of connection. Wasn't this exciting, getting invited to something? But she barely looked at me. A minute later, she excused herself to go get another drink. I followed her toward the drinks table. As soon as we were a few steps away from the group, I leaned in and asked quietly, "Is everything okay? You're kind of, avoiding me tonight. Did I do something?" I was trying to keep my tone light, but I'm sure the concern bled through. She sighed, exasperated, not even looking at me as she poured herself a vodka soda. "I'm fine. You're imagining things," she snapped, lowered my voice. "Vanessa, you've barely talked to me since we got here, but you've been glued to Daniel." I immediately regretted how jealous that sounded. "I mean, can we spend some time together? I feel like I came here alone." She shot me a sharp look. "We're at a party. I'm just socializing. Do you expect me to babysit you the whole time?" Her tone was biting. "Of course not," I said, defensive now. "It's just, we haven't really hung out at all, and I—" Before I could finish, one of her tipsy friends stumbled over, giggling, and slung an arm around Vanessa. "V, come take a shot with us," her friend squealed. Vanessa seized that escape route. She plastered on a smile and chirped, "Sure, be there in a sec." As her friend tottered off, Vanessa turned back to me, her face hardening again. "Just chill, okay? Go have fun or something. I'll come find you later." Then she whirled around and walked off, red plastic cup in hand, leaving me standing there feeling like a scolded child. I ran a hand through my hair, embarrassed and upset. A few people nearby had definitely noticed that little spat. My face burned. I wandered back toward the grill where a few of my buddies stood. Jake was there now, giving me a concerned look. He must have seen part of our exchange. Everything. "Good, man," he murmured under his breath. I forced a tight smile. "Yeah, we're good," I lied. He didn't buy it, but he let it drop. We started talking about some new superhero movie to shift the mood. 15 minutes passed. I still hadn't seen much of Vanessa. My eyes kept drifting to where I'd last seen her. Finally, I spotted her across the yard in a dimmer corner of the patio. She was with her girlfriends, and Daniel was there too, carrying a fresh bottle of champagne from the cooler. He was pouring drinks for everyone like he was the host. He had that kind of presence, even though it wasn't his house. The girls cheered as he popped the bottle. Vanessa was right next to him. He leaned down to say something close to her ear over the music. She smiled and clinked her plastic cup against his champagne flute in a mock toast. I couldn't do this anymore. My head was throbbing with anger and hurt. Jake noticed my agitation. "Just talk to her," he urged quietly. "Don't let this fester." He was right. If something was going on, better to confront it now, before she had more to drink. I steeled myself and walked over again, this time not bothering to pretend casualness. Most of her friends scattered as I approached. Whether they sensed the tension or just drifted off to mingle elsewhere, I don't know. Soon it was just me, Vanessa, and Daniel standing by the patio corner. Vanessa looked at me with irritation. "What now?" she muttered, barely audible over the background music. My heart was in my throat. My hands actually trembled a bit. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Can we talk, please? Alone?" I said, shooting a glance at Daniel. He raised an eyebrow but didn't move, just sipped his champagne. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Whatever you need to say, you can say here," she replied, slurring slightly. She'd definitely been knocking back drinks. I hesitated. This wasn't how I wanted this to go. "Vanessa, please," I said softly, reaching for her hand. She pulled her hand away like my touch burned. "Don't Nessa me," she snapped, voice rising. Then, loudly enough for people nearby to hear, "You're suffocating me tonight, you know that?" Blinked, stunned. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed heads turning in our direction. I'm just trying to figure out what's wrong," I said, attempting to keep my voice down. My face felt hot. The humiliation was already starting. "What's wrong is you won't leave me alone," she practically shouted. "God, can't I have a good time for once without you clinging to me?" Her voice cut through the party chatter like a knife. The music inside still played, but out here a hush was falling as people realized a drama was unfolding. I felt a flush creeping up my neck. "Clinging to you? I'm your fiancée, Vanessa. I came here to be with you," I said, trying to keep an even tone but hearing the hurt seep in. She rolled her eyes so hard it was almost theatrical. "Fiancé?" "Right." She let out a cold little laugh. "You think just because I wear this ring," she waved her hand with the engagement ring, "I owe you every second of my time?" Newsflash. Being engaged to you doesn't mean I have to be joined at your hip, especially when you're being boring and mopey. I heard a few gasps from the onlookers. My throat tightened. I'd never seen her act like this. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, feeling a sting of tears threatening. By now, a small crowd of friends and strangers had formed a semicircle, watching. Jake stepped forward, looking ready to intervene, but he held back. Vanessa wasn't finished. She turned to face the growing audience and raised her voice further, as if she wanted everyone to hear. "You want to know what's really wrong?" she announced, eyes almost wild. "I am sick of pretending I'm happy. I'm sick of scraping by and acting like it's enough, because it's not." I stared at her, heart hammering. What was she saying? She gestured around vaguely, maybe meaning our life together. This. Living in that tiny, crappy apartment, driving around in that beat-up car, pinching pennies on date nights. That might be fine for someone else, but I can't do it forever. I have dreams. I want to travel. I want a nice house. I want to not feel embarrassed when my friends' boyfriends talk about their accomplishments or all the nice things they do for them. Her voice was shaking with emotion, anger, frustration. I was in complete shock. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. "Embarrassed of me?" I managed to croak. She gave me a withering look. "You think I like having to make excuses for why my fiancé can't take a weekend trip or why I have a microscopic ring? You think I haven't noticed the pity looks when I talk about our budget wedding plans?" Tears stung my eyes. I didn't know you felt this way," I sputtered. My whole body was trembling. All around, people were dead silent, watching this train wreck happen. Vanessa let out a bark of laughter. "Of course you didn't know. I tried to be the cool girlfriend who doesn't care about that stuff, but guess what? I do care. I'm tired of being the one with the thrift store dresses and Groupon date nights. I want more." Her eyes glistened. She was either about to cry or just incredibly fired up. "Can we please not do this here?" I begged in a strained whisper. I could feel the humiliation crushing me, knowing all our friends and some strangers were witnessing this. She tossed her hair back defiantly. "Why not? Maybe I should have done this a long time ago." She looked around at the crowd, then directly at me, and her next words came out like venom. "I'm done settling. I'm done with you." It was like the floor dropped out from under me. A couple of people gasped or murmured. My vision blurred at the edges. "What?" I stammered. "You heard me?" she sneered, her voice loud. "I don't want to marry you. I can't marry someone with no ambition, no money, and no future." She was practically shouting now, and I flinched at each cruel word. Every eye was on us. I wished I could disappear. I wished it was a nightmare I'd wake up from. "I mean, look at you," she continued relentlessly, gesturing at me with contempt. "You're content doing nothing, going nowhere. You're poor and annoying, and I've had enough." She spat those words out with such disgust that it left me utterly shell-shocked. A collective "oh my God" rippled through the gathering. I heard someone mutter, "Is she serious?" My face went cold. Poor and annoying. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, had just reduced me to that in front of everyone. Vanessa's chest was heaving. Tears had started rolling down her cheeks, whether from anger or something else. For a split second, she looked almost as shocked as everyone else at what she'd just said. But then Daniel stepped closer to her, and a hard resolve came over her face. She reached for her left hand and tugged off the engagement ring. With a cold stare, she pressed it into my hand, which hung limp at my side. I didn't even close my fingers around it. I was too numb. "Take it," she said bitterly. "I don't want it anymore." I just stared at the ring sitting in my palm. The ring that minutes ago symbolized our future together. Now it was nothing but a cold piece of jewelry. Vanessa turned to Daniel, almost losing her balance in the process. She placed a hand on his chest to steady herself and looked up at him with pleading, glazed eyes. "You don't mind giving me a ride, do you?" she cooed, loudly enough for me to hear. Daniel glanced at me. I have no idea what was in his expression. Pity, smugness, shock, because my vision was swimming. He put an arm around Vanessa to support her. "Are you sure you want to do this, Vanessa?" he asked, maybe trying to be the voice of reason, or maybe just covering himself. She answered by practically throwing herself at him and pressing her lips to his, right there, in front of everyone. A few people actually whooped or cheered in disbelief. Most were just silent, jaws dropped. It was a long, deep kiss, the kind of kiss that makes it very clear what's going to happen next. I felt something inside me rupture, a mix of heartbreak, rage, and utter humiliation. My hands clenched into fists around that stupid ring. I think I made a strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, but I'm not sure. My ears were ringing and my face was on fire. When they finally pulled apart, Vanessa didn't even glance back at me. She grabbed Daniel's hand, and together they pushed through the crowd toward the gate, stumbling a bit as she went. The crowd parted for them. I saw a few friends shoot me sympathetic or horrified looks as they passed. I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, feeling 100 eyes on me and wanting to die on the spot. Someone put a hand on my shoulder. "Jake, I think—" I jerked away. Not because I meant to, but because I was in shock. Without a word, I turned and blindly started walking away, out the side gate, down the street to where my car was parked. I vaguely heard someone, Jake, definitely, calling my name, but I couldn't deal with anyone right then. I had to get out of there. I don't even remember driving home. I must have, because the next thing I really recall is sitting in my dark apartment on the couch, staring at the wall in silence. My phone was buzzing non-stop in my pocket. I eventually yanked it out and saw dozens of messages and calls, all from friends at the party. I couldn't handle it. I turned it off and tossed it aside. Then the reality of what had happened truly hit. And it hit hard. My fiancée, my former fiancée, I guess, had publicly dumped and humiliated me in the most brutal way imaginable. She'd called me poor and annoying in front of everyone, then left me for another man, practically on stage. With a shaky breath, I looked down at my hand, which was still clenched around something. I opened it, and there was the ring, the little diamond glinting faintly in the low light. It felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I set it on the coffee table, and that's when I broke down completely. I'm not someone who cries easily, but that night I cried harder than I ever have in my life. Gut-wrenching, ugly sobs that I couldn't control. I was glad I'd turned my phone off because I didn't want to speak to anyone. I just curled up on the couch and let it all out. The hurt, the anger, the disbelief. One moment I was sobbing, the next I was furious, cursing her name and punching a pillow. Then I'd go back to hollow silence, staring at the ceiling. I felt like I was on a roller coaster of despair. Sometime in the early morning, I finally passed out from sheer exhaustion. I woke up after dawn, my eyes swollen and head pounding. For a few blissful seconds, I didn't remember what had happened, and then it all flooded back in. I literally groaned in pain as the memory hit. That wasn't just a nightmare, it was my life. Messages were still blowing up my phone when I turned it back on. Friends asking if I was okay, expressing their shock and outrage at Vanessa. Even a couple of her friends had texted me apologies, which was weird. I didn't reply to anyone yet. I felt raw and fragile. I took the day off work. Perks of being the boss. No one questions you. I just couldn't face anyone or anything. I spent most of the day in a haze, alternating between numb staring into space and sudden bursts of tears or anger. Everywhere I looked in my apartment, I saw reminders of her. The throw blanket she loved, her coffee mug in my cabinet, a pair of her slippers under the couch. By afternoon, I knew I had to purge those things. I grabbed a box and started tossing in everything that was hers or made me think of her. It hurt like hell, but seeing them was worse. That evening, Jake showed up at my door. I hadn't answered his texts, so he came in person. I must have looked like a wreck, unshaven, eyes red, still in yesterday's clothes, but he just gave me a sympathetic nod and handed me a bag of takeout and a six-pack. "Figured you might need this," he said softly. He sat with me while I picked at the food. I had no appetite, but I tried, and told me what went down after I left the party. Apparently, everyone was stunned, and many were furious on my behalf. Some of our friends had lit into Vanessa, calling her out for how cruel she was. She ended up leaving pretty quickly with Daniel, no surprise, but not before getting an earful. It was satisfying in a small way to hear that nobody was applauding her behavior, but it didn't erase the humiliation I felt. Jake also knew about my double life, and shook his head in disbelief. If she only knew who she was throwing away, he muttered. What a fool. At that moment, I was too heartbroken to even care about the irony of it. My wealth secret felt trivial compared to the gaping hole of betrayal in my chest, but his comment planted a seed in my mind for later. Before he left, Jake gave me a hug and said, "It'll get better, man, one day at a time, and don't think for a second any of this was your fault. It's all on her." I tried to believe him. The next few days were rough. I avoided social media and ignored most calls. I couldn't stand the thought of being the subject of gossip or pity. Slowly, though, I started picking myself back up. I returned to work 2 days later, diving into it as a distraction. Stepping into my real office, the executive office downtown, felt strangely empowering after feeling so low. My employees greeted me respectfully as always, oblivious to the drama in my personal life. It reminded me that I had built something of value, that I wasn't the loser Vanessa painted me as. To help myself heal, I made some changes. I moved out of that apartment. There were just too many memories in those walls. I decided to stop hiding who I was, at least in my lifestyle. I had a luxury condo downtown that I usually kept empty. It was originally for show or for business guests, and I moved into it. I traded in the old Camry for a car I actually enjoyed driving. These things might sound superficial, but to me it was reclaiming the identity I'd suppressed. I wasn't doing it to flaunt. I was doing it because I wanted to, and I no longer had a reason to pretend otherwise. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster. Some days I felt almost okay, convincing myself I was better off. Other days I'd hear a song or find something in a drawer, like a love note she'd once written me, and I'd break down again. Healing isn't linear, I learned. I stayed no contact with Vanessa. She didn't reach out to me either, which I expected since she'd run off with Daniel. Through mutual friends, I heard tidbits. Word was she moved in with Daniel almost immediately. I tried not to let that get to me. She'd made her choice. Still, it was like rubbing salt in the wound to imagine them playing house together. About a month went by. With distance, I started gaining some clarity. Vanessa's words still stung in my memory, but I was also increasingly angry at how she treated me. The love I had for her was turning into something else. Not hate, but a mix of indignation and pity. I realized I was actually glad I hadn't married her. Imagine finding out your wife thinks you're a worthless loser. After tying the knot, small mercy had happened now, I guess. I threw myself into work and also started to enjoy my life, again, bit by bit. I hosted a poker night with friends at my new place. First time many had seen it, a few were shocked at the upgrade, and I ended up coming clean to some of them about my situation. I went to the gym regularly, channeling my emotions into something productive. Day by day, I could feel myself growing stronger, remembering who I was before her. Then, out of the blue, Vanessa came crashing back into my life. It was a chilly afternoon, about 2 months after the infamous party. I was in my office going over some project reports when my secretary buzzed in. "Sir, sorry to interrupt. There's a woman here asking to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but says it's personal. Her name is Vanessa." I almost dropped my pen. Vanessa? Here? At my real office? My secretary and most employees knew me by my real identity. This was my company headquarters. Vanessa had never been here. As far as she knew, I just worked at a small property office. Heart suddenly hammering, I took a moment before responding. Part of me wanted to send her away, but curiosity and perhaps a desire for closure got the better of me. "Send her in," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I stood up behind my desk, straightening my shirt as the door opened. Vanessa stepped in slowly. My breath caught. She looked different, not the confident, put-together woman I remembered. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying a lot. She wore a simple coat and jeans, none of the glam I often saw on her. We stared at each other for a long moment. She seemed taken aback by the sight of my big office. Her eyes darted around at the expansive view through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the polished furniture, the awards on my shelf. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally managed, "Hi." "Hi," I replied evenly. I remained standing, keeping the desk between us for now. "What brings you here, Vanessa?" She flinched a little at my formal tone. She stepped forward, wringing her hands. I'm sorry to just show up. You changed your number. I didn't know how else to reach you," she stammered softly. I said nothing, waiting. Tears welled in her eyes almost instantly. "I know I'm the last person you want to see. I came to apologize and to explain, if you'll let me." She looked genuinely broken. This wasn't the fiery woman who tore me down at the party. This was someone who'd been humbled. Quietly motioned for her to continue. Vanessa took a shaky breath. "What I did to you, it was unforgivable. I was horrible. I hurt you so badly, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." Her voice quivered. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was angry and drunk and just so caught up in my own frustration. None of what I said about you was true. You didn't deserve any of it." I felt a mix of emotions swirling. Seeing her cry like that stirred some pity in me, but I also remembered my own tears and pain. I stayed silent, jaw clenched. She sniffled and continued. "You were a great boyfriend. The problem was me. I got blinded by greed, I guess. By thinking I needed a different life. And I was wrong." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "I thought I was trading up, but it all blew up in my face." I'll admit, hearing that gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. "Karma," I thought, but I kept my expression neutral. "How so?" I asked quietly. She swallowed. "Daniel, it didn't work out." She let out a bitter little laugh through her tears. "That's an understatement. He basically kicked me out 2 weeks after I moved in. Turns out the grass isn't greener. He was controlling and he cheated on me." Her voice cracked. "I came home early one day and, Well, he didn't even apologize. He told me I was a distraction and I should leave. I leaned back slightly, absorbing this. I wasn't surprised, really. I'd gotten Playboy vibes from Daniel. Still, seeing Vanessa so defeated, it was a lot to process. She looked down, twisting her hands. I know none of that matters to you. I know I brought this on myself. After that happened, I realized how terribly I'd messed up. I kept remembering the look on your face that night at the party, and I hated myself. I've been wanting to reach out to you, to say all this, but I was afraid, and I didn't know if you'd ever speak to me again. I took a slow breath. So, you're here to apologize? She nodded vigorously. Yes, to apologize, and to see if there's any way you could ever forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back or anything. I know I don't deserve that. I just needed to tell you I'm sorry, and that you were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away. Her voice faded to a whisper on that last part, and she started sobbing. There it was, the grand apology and regret I had fantasized about her having. And now that it was happening, I felt oddly calm. Vanessa, I said quietly, I appreciate you saying all this. She looked up at me, eyes shining, hopeful, and desperate at once. I continued, what you did broke me. You know that, right? You hurt me more than anyone ever has. She nodded, crying. I know. I'm so sorry. I sighed. I can accept your apology, and I do forgive you. In time, I think I will fully, but I can't. Forget it. She swallowed hard, bracing herself. I understand. We stood in silence for a beat. She then asked, voice trembling, is there any chance at all that you could ever give me another shot? That we could try to start over? There it was, the million-dollar question. I had imagined this scenario so many times. Now, looking at her, I felt only a faint echo of the love I used to have. Too much had happened. I took a careful breath. I loved you, Vanessa. I began softly. I loved you with everything I had. But after what you did, I can't trust you anymore. And without trust, there's no relationship to rebuild. I'm sorry. She squeezed her eyes shut as fresh tears flowed. I understand, she choked. I had to ask, but I understand. Her shoulders trembled as she accepted my words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Her face was pained and full of regret. In a small, broken voice, she whispered, I'm so sorry for everything. I know, I replied gently. Despite it all, seeing her like this tugged at my heart. I hope you can learn from this and find some peace. I stood up a bit straighter, signaling that our conversation was nearing its end. She seemed to sense it and wiped her cheeks, trying to compose herself. She gave me a trembling, sad little smile. I hope one day you'll find someone who loves you the way you deserve, and that you'll be happy. A faint warmth touched me at her words. They did seem sincere. Thank you, I said, meeting her eyes. I truly wish the same for you, that you find happiness and become the person you want to be. Thank you, she whispered. I walked her to the office door in silence. We exchanged one last look. Hers full of remorse and sorrow, mine a bittersweet sadness. Goodbye, Vanessa, I said quietly. Goodbye, she replied, voice cracking, and then she was gone. I stood there for a moment after the door closed, exhaling a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A weight had been lifted off me. I felt free. That afternoon, I left work early. I took a long walk by the waterfront, thinking about everything. The sky was a clear, pale blue, and the winter air was crisp. I remember breathing deeply and actually feeling the knot in my chest loosen. Vanessa's betrayal had crushed me, but I survived. More than that, I grew. I came out wiser on the other side. The man who walked that waterfront was not the same naive guy who had walked into that party. These days, I'm doing so much better. Work is thriving. I've reconnected with friends, and I've even started enjoying life again. The memory of that humiliating night has faded to just a scar. It reminds me of how far I've come, but it doesn't hurt like before. In the end, what goes around comes around. Vanessa chased a life of wealth and ended up with nothing but regret. She lost someone who truly loved her, and she has to live with that. Meanwhile, I've emerged stronger and wiser. I know my worth now, and I won't ever settle for less than respect and genuine love. I'm grateful, in a way, that I saw her true colors before it was too late. I got a second chance at happiness, on my own terms. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm optimistic. I'll take my time and wait for the right person, someone who loves me for who I am, whether I'm poor or rich. Life has come full circle. I started this journey feeling broken and betrayed, and I'm ending it feeling empowered and at peace. And if that isn't the best kind of karma, I don't know what is.